Hi, welcome to Miss Richardson's U.S. History 5-Minute Lectures. This information is U.S. Notes 4.5, The Early Cold War Foreign Policies, Part 2. It includes information that aligns with the first section on your Unit 4 study guide. So remember, you have control of this lecture. Use your study guide to help you take those notes, so pause whenever you need to, rewind and rewatch what you need to, and write down any questions you have and bring those to class so that you get this information. Let's go ahead and get started. We've already looked at the overarching idea of containment and how this influenced U.S. foreign policy through the Marshall Plan and Truman Doctrine. So now we want to continue to look at how the U.S. practiced containment in Berlin and through alliances in this set of notes. So as you know, Germany had been separated into 4 zones at the Yalta Conference, one each to the U.S., Great Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. The Eastern Zone, controlled by the Soviet Union, held the German capital of Berlin, which was also split into 4 zones. So here you can see the 4 zones we're talking about. And then here's Berlin. See Berlin over here. And then this inset has how Berlin was split into the 4 zones. By 1948, the US, Great Britain, and France had officially combined their zones, which created the nation of West Germany. The Soviet zone then became East Germany and was a completely independent country from West Germany. So then we had East Germany was the brown, and the rest of them were, West Germany. East Germany included Berlin, 3/4 of which was actually controlled by the US, Great Britain, and France alliance. The Soviets felt as if the others had united against them, and they wanted to punish those other 3 countries. So to do that, they cut off Berlin from West Germany. The 3 countries were not allowed into East Germany, meaning they could not get to Berlin to supply the area. This became known as the Berlin Blockade. In June of 1948, the U.S. and their allies developed a plan to supply West Berlin and keep it from falling to the Soviets. So they wanted to keep it non-communist. This plan became known as the Berlin Airlift. In the Berlin Airlift, the U.S. used airplanes to fly over Berlin and airdropped thousands of pounds of food and supplies into the city. This kept citizens supplied, which kept them supporters of capitalism. Communism did not ever spread into West Berlin because of the Berlin Airlift. They were able to keep the supplies there. In May of 1949, after more than a year of the airlift, the Soviets gave up the blockade because it was not working, and the airlift ended. The end of the blockade did not signal an easing of tensions, however. So for a decade later, the Berlin Wall was built. We continued these tensions long past the airlift. Now, after seeing how serious the situation in Europe was and how tense both sides were, Truman decided the U.S. needed to ally with other like-minded countries against communism. Truman and Churchill of Great Britain developed a plan to unite into a peaceful treaty with 10 other countries. This alliance simply stated that if one member country was attacked, the other member countries would aid that country. It's called NATO, or the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and still exists today. It was created in peacetime, but was a result of the massive tension and distrust between the countries, the US and the Soviet Union in particular, at the time. The Soviets were obviously not included in NATO, which created even more tension and hard feelings. Then, in 1955, West Germany was allowed to rearm, so have a military, and they joined NATO. So this alarmed the Soviet Union. West Germany bordered communist countries, and it really seemed like it threatened the Soviet peace and security. So the Soviet Union, the USSR, felt it needed to protect itself. So they did that by creating the Warsaw Pact, which was an alliance of Eastern European communist nations that promised to support one another if they were attacked. Most of the member nations were satellite nations for the Soviet Union. By the 1950s, the U.S. had developed policies to contain communism in Europe, and the Soviets had developed policies to protect communism in Europe. But what about Asia? Well, that's our next set of notes. So this is the end of US Notes 4.5. Hopefully you learned something, and make sure you bring any of those questions you have to class tomorrow. I'll see you then.